Hello, welcome to the Emergency Management and Emergency Operations Center 101 training. Throughout this training, we are going to learn about emergency management and the function of the Emergency Operations Center, also called the EOC, broadly and in the context of Arlington County. The goal of this training is to provide a foundation of understanding about the EOC and your role as an emergency support function on which future related trainings can build on. You may be asking yourself, why is this training necessary? You know what your department does. Why isn't that enough? But let me pose a question to you. If an incident were to occur right now and you were asked to report to the Emergency Operations Center to fulfill your duties as an emergency support function, would you know what to do? Where would you start? How does your ESF fit into the EOC? Think about it for a second. What questions are coming up for you? Write those down. Our goal is to ensure you can answer those questions by the end of this training. You are a liaison for the ESF that your department falls under. To be an effective part of an ESF, understanding the structure and organization of and your role in an emergency operations center is vital to facilitating efficient incident response. On the screen, you will see the course objectives. These are our goals for the course. To be able to explain the role of emergency management in incident response, specifically in Arlington County. To understand the organization and function of the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, to be able to better serve as an emergency support function, or ESF, liaison. To be able to define what an emergency support function is, and what ESF function is before, during, and after an incident. And to achieve these objectives, we will be discussing what emergency management is and what emergency management looks like in Arlington County, how our EOC is organized, how it functions, and we'll go through all of the ESFs and what their responsibilities are and real-world examples of their contributions to incident response. To give some context to Arlington County emergency management and show where we started versus where we are now, prior to 2001, there was only one person fulfilling the emergency management role in Arlington County, and he was only part-time. His name was Captain Mark Penn, and he was assigned to a temporary role as the emergency management specialist with the Arlington County Fire Department. He was assigned to this position on September 10th, 2001. That date is so significant because of the events that took place just the next day. Less than 24 hours into the job, American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, and Arlington County had to pull together a response to the terrorist attack that we refer to as 9/11. Ever since that day, Arlington has maintained an emergency management team. How chaotic do you think it must have been to pull together that type of response without any established plans or procedures outside of the one department he was familiar with? Now, not all emergencies are as complex and large as 9/11, but ensuring that everyone who is responsible for responding to or managing emergencies in Arlington County understands their role in an emergency is vital to a successful response. So, what is emergency management? Before taking on this role, you may have never heard of the field of emergency management, but you have likely encountered it throughout your life. Emergency management's role is to support continuity of operations, whatever that means to an institution. We do that by executing the 4 planning phases: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. You can see this illustrated in the graphic on the screen. To be effective in those phases, emergency managers must be able to effectively coordinate, support, and communicate. We coordinate emergency preparedness by working with other entities to develop plans that address our response, mitigation, recovery, and continuity efforts. We coordinate the use and distribution of resources, which includes coordinating ESF support of incident response. And lastly, we take responsibility for the communication and information sharing between incident responders, county executives, and the community. There were a lot of moving parts in the explanation I just gave you. To better contextualize all of this, we're going to watch a video that gives a great explainer and visualization of what emergency management is and its role in incident management.
Not all disasters are alike. They can be viewed on a spectrum, from the simplest accident to a major disaster. Most of these emergencies don't need to be managed. They're handled by police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and other responders as routine matters. So what happens when really bad emergencies need more capability than the individual agencies can provide? That's where emergency managers come in, to coordinate all the agencies. And the bigger the scope of the incident, the more an emergency manager's value increases. Let's show this with a worst-case example. The largest of all disasters in terms of scale, complexity, and consequences is a nuclear strike. This is the mother of all disasters. Imagine some bad guys get a hold of 140 pounds of highly enriched uranium and figure out how to cobble together a working bomb, an improvised nuclear device. They get it into place and set it off. The result is confusion, fear, and chaos. Think of our society as a complex Rubik's Cube, interdependent systems that have developed over time to sustain our way of life. A nuclear attack severs our connections to the rest of society. Fear and anxiety would take over as the rhythm of our daily life is destroyed. So if that's the emergency, when does the management come in? Management is what emergency managers do, to create order from that chaos. Our job is to squeeze the timeline so we bring back order faster. The hard part is how. So let's take a look at the way emergency managers work. First, we get a few emergency managers together, in the field or in a room, and start working. We find the facts and tell the story. We tell who's in charge, what's happening, is it getting worse or getting better, and what are we doing and what needs to be done. We start to re-establish the connections severed by the blast. In the Emergency Operations Center, we begin to connect people and organizations to the city and to each other. We tell them to connect inside and outside their own organizations with the same message. This is what is happening, and what do you see to inform this picture? By doing this, we're creating a new organization, one that didn't exist before and will never exist again. Imagine this incident organization as a pyramid with 3 distinct levels. At the top is the strategic level, with agency executives, local, state, federal, and elected officials, where political objectives are translated into strategy. At the bottom of the pyramid is the biggest and most important level, the tactical level, or the people who we call the boots on the ground. And in the middle is where strategy is translated into effective action, where what we need to get done becomes the how we'll do it. We call this the operational level, and this is where the emergency managers sit. Their job is to support everybody, and they do it by managing information, telling everybody everything, managing resources, getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time, and managing consequences, finding and solving problems. But even if you were doing all that, you're still not done. You must tell everyone everything that you're doing all the time. It's critical for the leadership to know the facts so they can convey it to the public. This connection creates trust with the impacted population, and without it, credibility is lost, and our work won't matter. Some experts in government and academia believe that disaster response consists of leadership and the field, and that there's no need for the emergency managers. But the fact is, emergency managers create the incident organization that can manage the catastrophe. Only then can we turn our corner fast enough, where order is not yet restored, but the sense of order is palpable. The problem is that during a catastrophe, the only thing that doesn't grow quickly enough is the number of emergency managers at the operations level. We simply can't get big enough, fast enough. Keep in your mind this image of a catastrophic incident versus a tiny brake pad. Is this going to be able to manage this job? We have to be able to build this brake pad really big enough, fast enough, so we can create this incident organization and use it as the initiating mechanism for order, the starting point, back to that Rubik's Cube of complexity.
In the video, you saw that there were multiple levels of coordination during an incident. An easy way to remember this is to remember the statement, emergencies are locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. To better explain this in the context of Arlington County, I will use the COVID-19 pandemic as an example. So what does it mean that an emergency is locally executed? Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the county manager has made policy-level decisions on COVID-19 exposure, testing, and vaccinations for county employees. Emergency management has facilitated and supported COVID-19 response operations by setting up testing facilities and supporting the vaccination sites. However, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a shortage in necessary materials, such as masks and gloves, and Arlington was unable to source them. When an emergency is beyond the capabilities of our county, we can request support from the state. What does it mean that an emergency is state managed? As I said, early in the pandemic response, there were critical items such as masks and gloves needed across the county. The Department of Public Safety Communications and Emergency Management made a resource request to the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, asking for these resources. The state was able to fill this request and send us these critical supplies during the early days of response. But in an emergency as long and widely impactful as COVID-19, how does a small county like Arlington pay for all these necessary resources? What does it mean for an emergency to be federally supported? During the COVID-19 pandemic, FEMA Public Assistance Program has been reimbursing local governments, including Arlington, for much of our pandemic response expenses, including things like PPE purchases, county-run testing sites, and public vaccination clinics. Without this financial assistance, Arlington could not have responded to the pandemic as effectively as we did. For Arlington to fulfill our duties, we must work within the organization of the county. To make it easier to communicate and coordinate preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts, the Department of Public Safety Communications and Emergency Management, DPSCEM, has a direct reporting line to the Deputy County Manager and County Manager. This communication happens through the director of DPSCEM, which is indicated by the yellow arrow on the screen. To speak more on DPSCEM, within our departments, we have 3 divisions: the Emergency Communications Center, the Integrated Programs Division, and the Emergency Management Division. The Emergency Communications Center is also referred to as the 911 Call Center. The Integrated Programs Division houses the Budget and Finance Department, Communications, and Community Engagement. The Emergency Management Team houses the Preparedness Team, which is responsible for updating, revising, and storing all emergency management plans, policies, and procedures, as well as conducting trainings and exercises for different county departments and external partners. It also houses the Watch Desk. The Watch Desk is a specialized operations support unit that provides the county's emergency managers, public safety command staff, and government leadership with real-time situational awareness. Watch officers collect information regarding potential and actual risks, threats, and ongoing incidents that may have operational consequences for Arlington County. Often functioning in a high-stress and time-critical environment, the watch officer must determine the validity, urgency, and significance of information and disseminate it to relevant parties. And finally, houses the Emergency Management Operations. Emergency Management Operations is responsible for the maintenance of the technology of the Emergency Operations Center, the setup of the alternate EOC sites, the management of the DPSCEM's logistics space, and other special projects. When an event such as a hurricane occurs and the resulting emergency overwhelms the affected locality, a safe and secure location must be available where high-level emergency managers can meet to effectively coordinate response activities. This is usually done through a local or state emergency operations center. The EOC is a tool that emergency managers can use to bring together essential personnel to collect, analyze, and share incident information, support on-scene resource needs and requests, including resource allocation and tracking, coordinate plans, policies, and procedures to determine current and future needs, and overall support the incident command. The makeup of the EOC may depend on the specific incident. In some cases, the EOC roles will be pre-identified, while in other cases, potential EOC members will be requested to serve in the EOC as needed. To give an example of how the EOC is helpful in a disaster, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management activated the Arlington County EOC to support the COVID-19 response. This was helpful for several reasons, but to focus on one, the EOC was able to centralize the ordering process for necessary supplies like gloves, masks, and hand sanitizer, which helped stop any competition for resources between departments and ensured everyone in the county was able to access resources at a reasonable cost and within a reasonable timeline. On the screen, you can see an example of an EOC organization chart. The EOC manager oversees all EOC positions and is the person who will activate the EOC when needed. The Planning Section Chief, Logistics Section Chief, Finance and Administration Section Chief, and Operations Section Chief are part of what's called the General Staff. All of these positions have a direct reporting line to the EOC manager. All information for their respective section of work will go through the Section Chief to the EOC manager. Next, we'll give you a brief overview of the roles and responsibilities of each section. The Planning Section is led by the Planning Section Chief and responsible for the collection, evaluation, processing, and dissemination of information and intel about the emergency situation to the rest of the EOC. This information and intel is communicated to county leadership through the EOC manager to help maintain local and regional situational awareness and inform policy-level decision-making throughout the incident. The Logistics Section is led by the Logistics Section Chief and is responsible for the ordering of supplies, equipment, and materials, receiving and storing these resources, and distributing them in a timely manner. When resources are scarce locally, the Logistics Section is responsible for elevating resource requests to the state to support the incident response operations. The Finance Admin Section is responsible for managing purchase orders and tracking all disaster-related costs and staff time. This is an important task to make sure we are supporting response efforts within our financial means, ensure that those working as part of the response are compensated correctly for their time, and when applicable, be certain that we can apply for reimbursement for eligible costs through federal grant programs like the FEMA Public Assistance Program. Money is necessary for response, and the Finance and Administration section makes sure we have that money or we get that money when we need to appropriately respond to an incident at hand. For large-scale disasters, we may be able to get reimbursed for costs like debris clearing, staff overtime during response, and the permanent repair of damaged public property. The Operations section is led by the Operations Section Chief and responsible for the tactical operations for an emergency response. It's important to note that typically the emergency support functions are organized under the Operations branch and report to the Operations Section Chief. Once the EOC manager has activated the EOC, the Operations Section Chief will activate the necessary ESFs. So far, we've been talking about ESFs, but we haven't really dived into what they are. Emergency support functions provide the structure for organizing and coordinating county resources by area of function. The ESF structure helps ensure efficient and timely delivery of needed assistance to the community. Arlington's emergency support functions are categorized by the type of support or resource provided or managed. Arlington has 18 ESFs, which you can see on the screen. The ESF number is in the white column. The ESF support or resource grouping is in the dark blue column. And the lead agency is listed in the light blue column. We're now going to walk through each ESF and speak more specifically to their role. ESF 1, Transportation, is led by the Arlington Department of Environmental Services. Their purpose is the coordination of transportation infrastructure and service restoration activities, and assisting agencies in emergency support functions requiring transportation to perform missions following a disaster or emergency. An example of ESF1 in action includes, in an evacuation, ESF1 would be responsible for providing transportation as indicated in the evacuation plan. Also in an emergency, ESF1 is responsible for communication with Arlington Transit buses and WMATA. ESF1 is also responsible for traffic, engineering, and operations, which is the control and operation of signs, signals, and other types of markers which facilitate traffic movement and control. ESF2 Communications is led by the Department of Technology Services. The purpose of ESF2 is to provide technology support to public safety and other county agencies by maintaining continuity of information in telecommunication equipment and other technical resources. Their goal is to save lives, minimize property damage, and manage consequences of disasters by ensuring reliable, coordinated, interoperable communications between public safety and other county agencies, interjurisdictional mutual aid, state, federal, and non-governmental resources. ESF2 is responsible for maintaining and/or coordinating maintenance and repair of all necessary communication systems, to include county wireless devices such as cell phones, iPads, etc., satellite phones, landlines, video recording, internet, fax, radio, wireless access, and cable TV. An example of ESF2 in action includes getting support from ESF2 during EOC activations, making sure our EOC technology, such as computers, conferencing, wireless, all runs correctly. This is increasingly important in the growing virtual working environment. Another example would include ensuring that the Emergency Communication Center can maintain continuous operation through a disaster, and that the county cache of radios are kept up to date and operable so responders can communicate in the absence of cellular network capability. ESF3 Public Works is led by the Department of Environmental Services. The purpose of ESF3 is to coordinate the operations, identification, and management of critical facilities and the disposal and containment of debris in the event that an emergency situation results in widespread debris, such as downed trees and building materials. ESF3 collects, analyzes, and disseminates information on the impact and status of critical infrastructure and systems, including solid waste, water treatment and distribution, wastewater collection, sewage treatment, and other vital facilities to the county. This function encompasses the full range of public works and engineering services that may be required to support emergency response operations and provide critical services to residents impacted by the incident. ESF3 collects, processes, recycles, and disposes of debris from public right-of-ways and public property. These operations will ensure adequate vehicle and pedestrian movement and minimize health risks associated with debris. ESF3 also manages disposal operations of debris in the most efficient, effective, and permissible manner. An example of ESF3 in action includes activities such as monitoring water main breaks and repairs, maintaining and executing the debris management plan, and snow clearing and removal. ESFs 4, 9, and 10, Firefighting, EMS, and Hazardous Materials, are led by the Arlington County Fire Department. ESF 4, Fire and EMS, is the liaison between On-Scene Incident Command and the EOC to ensure a coordinated and comprehensive response during an incident or event by coordinating fire response resource requests and situational updates. ESF 9, Search and Rescue, works with and acquires the resources available for urban search and rescue in Arlington County and the process for obtaining other USAR assets. ESF-10, Hazardous Materials, coordinates the response by Arlington County to hazardous materials emergencies. Examples of ESF 4, 9, and 10 in action include coordinating medical services for large events such as the Marine Corps Marathon, inaugurations, and July 4th festivities, providing testing or vaccination support, and large emergencies such as apartment fires, traffic accidents, or hazmat incidents. ESF 5, Emergency Management, is led by the Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management. The purpose of ESF 5 in an incident is to coordinate and support resource requests, incident needs, and the release of emergency information to the public through external affairs. ESF 5 is also responsible for preparing for planned events and unplanned incidents, and maintaining the intelligence and information gathering functions of the watch desk. During an emergency, ESF 5 supports the incident command if established, opens the Emergency Operations Center if needed, and staffs the EOC with the appropriate emergency support function representatives required to meet the incident needs. An example of ESF 5 in action includes providing centralized locations for county resources to coordinate for incidents or events like severe weather, natural disasters, blizzards, floods, or large planned events such as a presidential inauguration, July 4th celebrations, or large races. ESF 6, Mass Care, is led by the Department of Human Services. The purpose of ESF 6 is to provide shelter, food, and emergency first aid following an emergency or disaster. They are responsible for setting up welfare inquiry systems to collect, receive, and report information about the status of victims and assist with family reunification, bulk distribution of emergency relief supplies, and operate family assistance centers. An example of ESF 6 in action includes setting up and running an emergency shelter for emergency or disaster victims, establishing a family assistance center to provide support and information to victims and families after a disaster, and coordinating with the American Red Cross and Animal Welfare League of Arlington to ensure care and feeding resources are available for humans and pets involved in the disaster. ESF 7, Resource Support, is led by the Department of Management and Finance. ESF 7 is responsible for coordinating the acquisition of resources necessary to assist incident operations or continuity of government or operations. An example of ESF 7 in action includes identifying and working with vendors to purchase PPE and supplies necessary for incident response, and maintaining contracts to allow the use of rental equipment, contractors, and facilities. ESF 8 and 11, Public Health, is led by the Department of Human Services Public Health Division. Their purpose is to ensure comprehensive public health and medical response following an emergency or disaster, ensure continuance of medical care services and availability of medical supplies, ensure emergency medical treatment for disaster casualties, provide disease surveillance, investigation, containment, and coordination of public messaging, assess behavioral health needs following disasters, and provide interventions to minimize harmful stress levels for the general public, provide environmental health and public health support to all other ESF groups and county agencies as required, and ensure food and water safety. An example of ESF 8 and 11 in action includes the planning, setup, and operation of county vaccination sites, like the COVID-19 vaccination site, coordinating with VDH, the Virginia Department of Health, during a health emergency, and providing guidance on county health policies. ESF 12, Energy, is led by the Department of Environmental Services. The purpose of ESF 12 is to make sure that we have the electricity we need to power our facilities. ESF 12 works to restore the public utility systems critical to saving lives, protecting health, safety, and property, and to enable other emergency support functions to respond. An example of ESF 12 in action includes coordinating with Dominion Energy during times of mass power outages from severe weather incidents, and maintaining and executing the Energy Assurance Plan. ESF 13, Public Safety, is led by the Arlington County Police Department. The purpose of ESF 13 is to integrate public safety and security capabilities and resources to support the full range of incident management activities associated with potential or actual incidents in the county, region, or nation. An example of ESF 13 in action includes overseeing traffic control during an evacuation to ensure an orderly flow of traffic and proper parking at reception centers and shelters, providing information on traffic and road closures during large planned events such as the Marine Corps Marathon and Army 10 Miler, and coordinating with ACPD units on scene at an incident. ESF 15, External Affairs, is led by the County Manager's Office. The purpose of ESF 15 is to ensure that sufficient county assets are deployed to provide accurate, coordinated, and timely information to the public, the media, and local, state, and federal governmental partners. Generation of timely public information is essential to avoid or minimize loss of life and property if a disaster is imminent or has occurred. Before, during, and after emergency operations, ESF 15 provides updates to the public through news media, the internet, alerting systems, radio, and various alternative media. An example of ESF 15 in action includes working with news stations and internet and social media platforms to provide the public with information regarding COVID vaccinations and testing sites. ESF 16, Employee Support, is led by the Employee Assistance Program. ESF 16's purpose is to provide support to county employees and family members during an emergency or disaster. The actions to be taken include but are not limited to the following: critical incident stress management, support communications between the employees and their families, and monitoring organizational responses. An example of ESF 16 in action includes activities such as the Employee Assistance Program, providing on-scene mental health intervention to employees and family members as requested. The Employee Assistance Program will also provide post-incident mental health intervention to employees and family members as requested. ESF 17, Volunteer and Donations Management, is led by the Department of Human Resources. The purpose of ESF 17 is to develop and implement systems to manage and coordinate unaffiliated or spontaneous volunteers and donated goods, including cash donations, during an emergency or disaster recovery effort. An example of ESF 17 in action includes activities such as the coordination and management of critical PPE donations from the community during COVID-19, and the management of volunteers at various response and recovery activities. ESF 18, Damage Assessment, is led by the Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development. The purpose of ESF 18 is to manage and direct the damage assessment process following an emergency or disaster, including completing an initial damage assessment within 48 hours of the incident ending and performing more in-depth assessments later. These assessments will map out and estimate the nature and extent of countywide damages to private and public property and inform potential county requests for state and federal assistance to recover. An example of ESF 18 in action includes the deployment of building inspectors around the county to inspect the damage to homes and facilities from flooding and other severe weather. In summary, we just went through all of the ESFs. This is an example of what a typical organization structure for the ESFs under the operations section would look like for a full activation. It is important to note in a smaller activation, there may be no operations section activated. In that scenario, the ESFs needed to support the activation will report directly to the EOC manager. Now that we've gone through all of the ESFs, their responsibilities, and their organization, we're going to walk through some real-world examples of EOC activations to help contextualize the content. An example of when ESFs may be activated in a no-notice event is a structure fire. On a chilly morning, fire department units were dispatched for a structure fire in a 4-story residential apartment building on Columbia Pike. 16 apartment units were affected by the fire. The ACFD incident commander contacts the ECC and watch desk and requests emergency management to assist with the over 60 displaced apartment residents with pets. A total of 3 alarms were dispatched to extinguish the fire, bringing over 70 firefighters and 20 fire apparatuses to the incident. Emergency management with the watch desk raised the EOC activation level to a partial activation. DPSCEM staff working with select ESFs begin to assist the displaced residents. ESFs activated to assist include ESF 3 Public Works, who are activated to work with local community centers to host a shelter. ESFs 4, 9, and 10 Firefighting. Along with the active response at the fire, ACFD would work with an emergency management liaison at the fire scene to address any resource or other needs of the incident. ESF 6, Mass Care, is activated to work with the Red Cross and Animal Welfare League of Arlington to set up a shelter and provide aid to the displaced residents and pets. And ESF 13, Law Enforcement, activated to provide shelter security and traffic control at the scene. As an incident develops, the needs of the incident change, which means that ESFs may be activated or demobilized at different times throughout an EOC activation. An example of a pre-planned activation is a presidential inauguration. Inaugurations often draw hundreds of thousands of people to the nation's capital and could have impacts in Arlington. Arlington's primary concern during an event like presidential inauguration would be a mass evacuation of Washington, D.C. due to an act of violence or threat of attack. Being a pre-planned event with a set date, emergency management has prepared for weeks for this activation. Preparatory meetings and coordination calls have occurred between emergency management staff, ESFs, and other community partners. The sharing of information and plans has occurred, and DPSCEM has selected the ESFs that will be activated during the inauguration. The ESFs activated reflect the resources and capabilities required to manage the evacuation of thousands of people out of DC and into Arlington. The EOC is at a monitoring activation level for days leading up to the inauguration, then upgraded to a limited activation hours before the inauguration starts. For this limited activation, several ESFs are present to assist. ESF 1, Transportation, is activated to keep situational awareness of the road closures and traffic control. ESF 1 also has control of local buses to be used in case of an evacuation of Washington, D.C. occurs. ESF 2, Communications, helps to maintain the infrastructure for communication within the EOC and evacuee staging areas in an evacuation situation. ESF 3, Public Works, has public works assets and control of parks and public spaces that may be needed in an evacuation situation. ESF 4, 9, and 10, firefighting, provides direct contact with the fire and EMS units available in Arlington should a situation arise. ESF 6, mass care, maintains contact with the Red Cross and can provide sheltering assistance. ESF 8 and 11, public health, addresses public health concerns. ESF 13, public safety and security, provides direct contact with the ACPD, helping to monitor any crowds moving towards Arlington and provides road closure and crowd control abilities. ESF 17, volunteer management, maintains volunteers that would be needed to run an evacuee staging area if needed. All of these ESFs would be working together with DPSCEM staff to maintain situational awareness of the inauguration and are ready to respond to any incident that may affect Arlington. Arlington has predetermined EOC activation levels corresponding to the need of the incident. I am going to walk you through each level of activation. But first, it's important to understand that a level 1 activation is the highest level of activation, and a level 4 activation is the lowest level of activation. This can be a tricky concept because we're typically used to a higher number indicating a higher intensity or need in our everyday lives. Level 4 activation is monitoring. The watch desk maintains a monitoring and notification capability for steady-state operations. An example of this is when the watch desk is monitoring a situation such as a tornado watch or a protest that is occurring in Washington, D.C. that has the possibility of affecting Arlington. ESFs will maintain a monitoring stance at this activation level. Level 3 activation is a limited activation. Monitoring levels are increased for an evolving emergency or planned event. Going back to the example of the tornado, the EOC might increase to a limited activation when there's minor damage caused by a microburst. Emergency management staff will be in the EOC, and all ESFs will maintain monitoring stances, with some ESFs being brought into situational awareness calls. Level 2 activation is a partial activation. The EOC is partially activated in response to a significant emergency where routine assistance is provided from ESFs. An example of a partial activation is because of moderate damage from a tornado. DPSCEM will bring in the full staff of the EOC to work with a select number of ESFs. Level 1 activation is a full activation. All Command and General staff positions are filled in the EOC. Branches are established, and most, if not all, ESFs are required. In our tornado example, there would be widespread damage throughout the county, and every ESF would have a part to play in the response and recovery to the tornado damage. Here is the full list of EOC activation levels. To summarize what we just discussed, during a level 1 and 2 activation, the EOC has a full Command and General staff, which, as a reminder, includes the planning, operations, logistics, and finance and admin sections. There is a plan being formed called an Incident Action Plan, or IAP, being written for each operational period, and there are likely multiple operational periods needed to resolve the incident. In level 3 and 4 activations, a full Command and General staff are not activated, and there is no incident action plan being developed. These incidents tend to resolve within one operational period. So you're being activated for an EOC activation. What comes next? For the activation, you will either be requested to assist in the EOC virtually or in person. If activated in person, you will be informed of where and when to report upon activation. If activated virtually, you will be provided with a reporting time for when you are expected to be alert and available on Microsoft Teams and Web EOC. Some of the expectations of those working in the EOC include participation in the planning and information management process, sharing situational updates as needed, and attending meetings as required, active engagement in continuous analysis and exchange of information, and ensuring that you have access to Microsoft Teams and Web EOC. If you're being activated in person, you should be prepared to bring your laptop, headphones, cell phone, and associated chargers, bring something to write on and write with, and bring any medications, personal hygiene supplies, and any food, snacks, and water that you may need. DPSCEM will work on providing food and water for the EOC, but it may not be immediately available. Keep in mind that a typical EOC operational period is 12 hours, but it may be longer. You should consider what your family will do if you're activated in the EOC for a prolonged or no-notice event, and ensure that you and your family have supplies and plans that can assist you in being prepared to activate. If you're activated virtually, you're expected to be attentive to the EOC meeting schedule and stay engaged and informed throughout the activation. Once an ESF is activated to assist in an EOC activation, you are the representative of your department and area of responsibility. One of the main ways that an ESF supports incident response is by providing information and resources. During an activation, you will be asked to provide answers to the following 4 questions. What information do you need to effectively coordinate incident response with your ESF partners and your department? What information from your ESF and your department can you provide to help the county create a common operating picture of the incident? What resources does your ESF or department need to be able to complete their functional responsibility during an incident? And what resources can you provide from your ESF that can assist in the completion of incident objectives? During an activation, you will be the main point of contact for your ESF. Make sure that you know how to communicate with other members of your ESF, how to contact your department's leadership if needed, and how to coordinate with your ESF partners outside of Arlington County government. Be proficient with the use of Microsoft Teams and Web EOC, as those are our main communication methods in the EOC, and actively engage in continuous analysis and exchange of information. Know your ESF's specific activation procedures. Check with your ESF lead on how your specific ESF assigns activation responsibilities. What is your role as an ESF? Working in the EOC is only a small percentage of what ESFs do. When DPSCEM is not in an EOC activation, we are constantly working with ESFs towards preparing for the next potential incident or activation. This includes participation in training, drills, and exercises. These plans, trainings, exercises, and other preparedness activities that we conduct would be ineffective if we did not have your subject matter expertise, feedback, and participation. The lessons learned and corrective actions taken from these trainings and exercises will rely on ESF cooperation and effort to implement and improve Arlington County's readiness. Another expectation includes keeping supporting documents up to date. The creation and updating of plans such as Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment, THIRA, and Continuity of Operation Plans, COOP, require ESF support to be effective. Any departmental plans that are updated or created that may affect emergency preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery should be shared with DPSCEM. The third expectation is to maintain Web EOC proficiency. Web EOC is a crisis information management system that DPSCEM uses during incidents to share information and track resource requests. Periodic Web EOC trainings and drills will be provided by DPSCEM. Please participate in these trainings to keep your Web EOC proficiency to be able to share information during incidents. And last but not least, stay engaged. These are just a few activities that emergency management may need your assistance in. Please stay actively engaged with emergency management and stay up to date on county-wide and departmental activities and sharing information with DPSCEM that may affect emergency management plans and actions. As an ESF, we have a couple of expectations for training. We require you to take this EOC 101 training, which you're doing right now. We also require you to sign up for Web EOC training. In addition, we require you to take 4 FEMA independent study courses. These are free, self-paced courses provided by the FEMA Emergency Management Institute for people who have emergency management responsibilities. ICS 100, Introduction to the Incident Command System. ICS 200, ICS for Single Resources and Initial Action Incidents. ICS 700, an Introduction to the National Incident Management System. ICS 800, an Introduction to the National Response Framework. These 4 courses will provide you with the basic understanding of how all levels of government, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector work together to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the effects of emergency incidents and disasters. It's not mandatory for further EOC familiarization, but we recommend that you also take IS 2200, Basic Emergency Operations Center Functions. Please keep copies of the certificates that you earn by completing the FEMA online courses, as you may be required to submit them later for record. After this training, you will receive instructions on how to take our Web EOC training, submit training certificates, and information on additional trainings via email. On behalf of the Department of Public Safety, Communications, and Emergency Management, we would like to thank you for taking the time to complete this Emergency Management and Emergency Operations Center 101 training. We appreciate your support and efforts.